Marcus wiped the sweat from his forehead as his pickup truck bounced along the dusty road that cut through the Arizona desert. The scorching June sun beat down mercilessly, turning the landscape into a shimmering mirage of heat waves and endless brown earth. He had been driving for 3 hours straight, delivering supplies to remote construction sites scattered across the barren territory. This was his life now, a far cry from the corporate office job he had left behind in Phoenix 2 years ago after his divorce. The radio crackled with static as he adjusted the dial, searching for any station that could reach this godforsaken stretch of desert. Nothing but white noise filled the cabin of his truck. Marcus sighed and reached for his water bottle, taking a long gulp of the lukewarm liquid. He glanced at his watch. 3:47 p.m. One more delivery to the mining operation 30 miles ahead, and he could head back to town before nightfall. As he rounded a bend in the road, something caught his eye in the distance. At first, he thought it was just another piece of desert debris, maybe a tumbleweed or discarded trash. But as he drew closer, his heart began to race. There, about 50 yards off the main road, lay what appeared to be a human form crumpled against a large boulder. Marcus slammed on the brakes, sending a cloud of dust billowing around his truck. He grabbed his water bottle and first aid kit from the glove compartment and ran toward the figure. As he approached, he could see it was a young woman, probably in her early 20s, wearing torn jeans and a faded yellow t-shirt. Her long dark hair was matted with dirt and sweat, and her lips were cracked and bleeding from dehydration. "Miss! Miss! Can you hear me?" Marcus called out as he knelt beside her. The woman's eyes fluttered open briefly, revealing deep brown irises that seemed to plead for help. She tried to speak, but only a weak rasp escaped her throat. Marcus quickly opened his water bottle and carefully dripped small amounts onto her lips. "Easy now. Just small sips," he said gently, supporting her head with his free hand. The woman managed to swallow a few drops and some color began to return to her pale cheeks. Marcus looked around the desolate landscape, wondering how on earth she had ended up here. The nearest town was 40 miles away, and there were no other roads or buildings in sight. After several minutes of giving her water and shade from his own shadow, the woman was able to speak in a whisper. "Por favor, ayuda," she managed to say in Spanish. Marcus knew enough of the language from his years living in Arizona to understand she was asking for help. "Don't worry, I'm going to get you out of here," he assured her. "What's your name?" "Elena," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the desert wind. Marcus carefully lifted Elena and carried her to his truck. She was frighteningly light, clearly malnourished and weakened by her ordeal in the desert. He helped her into the passenger seat and cranked up the air conditioning, then gave her more water while she slowly regained her strength. As Elena sipped the water, Marcus tried to piece together what had happened. Her clothes suggested she had been walking for days, and the cuts on her arms and legs indicated she had been traveling through rough terrain. But what struck him most was the fear in her eyes, a deep terror that seemed to go beyond the immediate danger of being lost in the desert. "Elena, where did you come from?" "How did you get here?" Marcus asked gently in broken Spanish. Elena's eyes darted nervously around the truck's interior before settling on Marcus's face. She seemed to be weighing whether she could trust this stranger who had appeared like an angel in her darkest moment. Finally, she spoke in halting English. "I was running. Bad men. They hurt people. I escaped but got lost." Her voice trembled as she spoke, and Marcus could see the trauma etched in her young features. Marcus felt a chill run down his spine despite the desert heat. He had heard stories about human trafficking operations that moved people across the border, but he had never encountered it firsthand. Looking at Elena now, so young and vulnerable, he felt a surge of protective anger toward whoever had put her in this situation. "Listen to me, Elena. You're safe now, okay? I'm going to take you somewhere you can get help." Marcus started the truck and began driving toward the nearest town. He grabbed his cell phone, hoping to get a signal, but the display showed no bars. They were still too far from civilization. As they drove, Elena gradually began to share more of her story. She had been living in a small village in Mexico with her grandmother when men had come in the middle of the night. They had promised her work in America, a chance to send money back home to help her family. But once she crossed the border, the reality became a nightmare of forced labor and abuse. "They kept us in a house, many girls," Elena explained, her English improving as she became more comfortable with Marcus. "I was there for months. We worked in fields all day and at night." She trailed off, unable to continue, but Marcus understood the implication. "How did you escape?" he asked. There was a fight between the men. I ran when they were not watching. I walked for 3 days, I think. No food, little water. I thought I would die in the desert. Marcus gripped the steering wheel tighter, his knuckles turning white. The casual evil of what Elena described made his stomach turn. This young woman had endured horrors that most people couldn't imagine, and yet she had found the courage to risk everything for freedom. As they approached the outskirts of Tucson, Marcus faced a dilemma. He knew he should take Elena to the police, but he also understood her fear. Undocumented immigrants often face deportation. Even when they were victims of crimes, Elena had already suffered so much. He couldn't bear the thought of her being sent back to the very dangers she had risked her life to escape. Elena, we need to decide where to go. I can take you to the police, or to a hospital, or... Marcus paused, realizing he was about to make a decision that could change both their lives. Or you can stay with me for a few days, while we figure out the best way to help you. Elena looked at him with surprise. In her experience, men who helped her always wanted something in return. But there was something different about Marcus, a genuine kindness that she hadn't encountered in months. You would do this? But you don't know me, she said. Everyone deserves help when they need it, Marcus replied simply. Besides, you look like you could use a good meal and a safe place to rest before making any big decisions. Elena nodded slowly, tears beginning to form in her eyes. For the first time in months, someone was offering her kindness without expecting anything in return. It was a feeling she had almost forgotten existed. As they drove through the suburbs of Tucson, Marcus began to think about the practical challenges ahead. His small apartment wasn't much, but it had a couch where Elena could sleep safely. He would need to buy food and clothes for her, and eventually they would have to deal with the legal complications of her situation. But for now, his focus was simply on helping a fellow human being who had been dealt a terrible hand by life. Marcus glanced at Elena, who was staring out the window at the passing buildings with a mixture of wonder and apprehension. The city must seem overwhelming after months of captivity and days in the desert. He made a mental note to take things slowly, to give her time to adjust and feel safe. Elena, I want you to know that you don't have to tell me anything more about what happened if you don't want to. But if you ever want to talk, or if you need anything at all, just ask, okay? Elena turned to look at him, and for the first time since he had found her, she smiled. It was a small, tentative smile, but it transformed her entire face. Marcus realized that beneath the dirt and trauma, Elena was quite beautiful, with intelligent eyes and a strength that had carried her through unimaginable hardships. Thank you, she said simply. I don't know why you helped me, but thank you. As Marcus pulled into his apartment complex, he reflected on how this day had started like any other and was now ending with a complete stranger depending on him for safety and shelter. He had always considered himself a decent person, but he had never been tested like this before. Looking at Elena, still weak but no longer fading, he felt a sense of purpose that had been missing from his life since his divorce. The sun was setting behind the mountains, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and purple. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and difficult decisions, but tonight Elena would sleep in safety for the first time in months. And Marcus would lie awake, wondering how one moment of compassion on a desert road had suddenly given his life new meaning. The first week of Elena's stay passed in a careful dance of trust and healing. Marcus had called in sick to work for 2 days, claiming food poisoning, while Elena recovered from her ordeal. He spent those days watching her sleep fitfully on his couch, occasionally bringing her water or soup when she woke. The nightmares came regularly, leaving her gasping and trembling in the darkness, and Marcus would sit quietly nearby until the terror passed. Elena spoke little during those initial days, communicating mostly through nods and grateful glances. Marcus gave her space, understanding that trust would take time to rebuild after what she had endured. He stocked his kitchen with simple foods that might remind her of home. Rice and beans, fresh tortillas from the local market, and plenty of bottled water. He also bought her basic necessities, clothes that fit properly, toiletries, and a small Spanish-English dictionary to help them communicate better. On the 4th day, Elena finally felt strong enough to shower properly. When she emerged from the bathroom wearing clean clothes and with her long hair freshly washed, Marcus was struck by her transformation. The hollow-eyed, sunburned waif he had found in the desert was gone, replaced by a young woman with remarkable presence and dignity. Despite everything she had suffered, Elena carried herself with a quiet strength that commanded respect. I must thank you again, Elena said as she sat at Marcus's small kitchen table, speaking slowly but clearly in English. You saved my life, and I have nothing to give you. You don't need to give me anything, Marcus replied, pouring her a cup of coffee. But I've been thinking about what comes next. You can stay here as long as you need, but we should probably talk about your options. Elena's face grew serious. She had been dreading this conversation, knowing that her precarious situation couldn't remain hidden forever. In my country, I have nothing. My grandmother, she is very old, very poor. The men who took me, they said they would hurt her if I ran away. Marcus set down his coffee cup and looked directly at Elena. Do you believe them? I don't know, maybe they say this to frighten me. But maybe, she shrugged, the gesture conveying both hope and despair. Over the following days, as Elena grew stronger and more comfortable, her story emerged in fragments. She had been studying to become a teacher before the traffickers destroyed her life. She was intelligent and had learned English from books and television, dreams of education and helping children, driving her to excel despite her circumstances. The men who held her had recognized her intelligence and had planned to move her to what they called better work, which Elena knew meant something even worse than the agricultural labor she was forced to do. Marcus found himself drawn to Elena's resilience and gentle wisdom. Despite her youth and traumatic experiences, she possessed an innate understanding of people that reminded him of his grandmother. She began helping around his apartment without being asked, cooking traditional Mexican dishes that filled his home with wonderful aromas for the first time in years. She mended a tear in his work shirt with stitches so neat they were invisible, and organized his chaotic bookshelf with the care of someone who truly valued books. One evening, as they sat on his small balcony watching the sunset, Elena asked Marcus about his own life. He found himself telling her about his failed marriage, his ex-wife's criticism that he lacked ambition, his decision to leave his corporate job for the simpler but more honest work of deliveries. Elena listened without judgment, occasionally asking thoughtful questions that showed she was really paying attention. Your wife, she wanted you to be someone different? Elena asked. I guess so. She wanted someone who cared more about money and status. I just wanted to be content with what I had. And now? Are you content? Marcus considered the question seriously. I was getting there. But since you've been here, I realize I was just existing, not really living. Taking care of someone else, feeling needed again. It's reminded me of who I want to be. Elena smiled, and Marcus noticed how her whole face lit up when she was genuinely happy. It was becoming increasingly difficult for him to imagine his apartment without her presence, without the sound of her humming while she cooked, or the way she always made sure his coffee cup was full. As the second week progressed, Marcus began to seriously consider the legal aspects of Elena's situation. He researched immigration lawyers online and learned about programs that might help trafficking victims. The process would be complicated and expensive, but there were paths to legal status for people in Elena's circumstances. The challenge would be proving her case and finding the resources to navigate the system. Elena was both hopeful and terrified at the prospect of involving lawyers and government officials. She had learned to fear authority figures of all kinds, but she also knew that her current situation couldn't continue indefinitely. Marcus was taking risks by helping her, risks that could get him in serious legal trouble if discovered. I don't want to bring problems to your life, Elena told him one evening as they discussed their options. You have been so kind, but this is not your responsibility. Maybe it's not my responsibility, Marcus agreed, but it's my choice. And I choose to help you build a real life here, if that's what you want. The conversation was interrupted by a knock at the door. Marcus and Elena froze, looking at each other with sudden fear. Marcus rarely had visitors, and it was after 9 o'clock at night. Through the peephole, he saw a man in a suit standing in the hallway, someone he didn't recognize. Sir, I'm Detective Rodriguez with Tucson Police. I'd like to ask you some questions about suspicious activity in the area. Marcus's heart began racing, but he tried to keep his voice steady. Just a minute, he called through the door. He turned to Elena, who had gone pale with terror. Without a word, she disappeared into the bathroom and quietly locked the door. When Marcus opened the front door, Detective Rodriguez was professional but thorough. He explained that there had been reports of human trafficking activity in the area, and they were canvassing the neighborhood to see if anyone had noticed unusual behavior. He asked if Marcus had seen anything suspicious. Any signs of people being held against their will or unusual traffic in and out of nearby buildings? Marcus answered honestly that he hadn't noticed anything unusual in his neighborhood, while his mind raced with the implications. Were the men who had held Elena searching for her? Had someone seen her at his apartment and reported it? He managed to maintain his composure until the detective left, but as soon as the door closed, he slumped against it in relief. Elena emerged from the bathroom, her face etched with worry. "They are looking for me," she whispered. "We don't know that," Marcus said, though he suspected she was right. "But we need to be more careful, and we need to move faster on getting you legal protection." That night, neither of them slept well. Marcus lay awake on his bed, staring at the ceiling and wondering if he was in over his head. He cared deeply about Elena now, more than he was comfortable admitting even to himself. She had become part of his daily routine, part of his thoughts and plans for the future. The idea of anything happening to her filled him with a fierce protectiveness he hadn't felt since his marriage ended. Elena spent the night on the couch, listening to every sound outside the apartment. She had thought she was safe, that the nightmare was behind her, but the detective's visit had reminded her that she was still vulnerable. More troubling was her growing attachment to Marcus and the life they had been building together. She was falling in love with this kind, gentle man who had saved her life, but she knew that caring about someone made her a liability to them. The next morning, Marcus made a decision that would change everything. He called a friend from his former corporate life, someone who now worked for a non-profit organization that helped trafficking victims. It was time to stop hiding and start fighting for Elena's future, whatever the risks. "Elena," he said as they shared breakfast, "I want to introduce you to someone who can help us, really help us, legally and properly. But it means coming out of hiding." "It means trusting the system?" Elena looked at him for a long moment, studying his face. In his eyes, she saw determination and something else that made her heart skip a beat. Something that looked very much like love. It was terrifying and wonderful at the same time. "If you think we should do this, then we do it," she said simply. "I trust you with my life." Marcus reached across the table and took her hand. It was the first time they had touched deliberately, and the simple contact sent warmth spreading through both of them. They sat like that for several minutes, hands clasped, preparing for the next phase of their journey together. The meeting with Marcus's friend Sarah Chen took place at a small coffee shop downtown, chosen specifically because it felt less intimidating than an office setting. Sarah worked for the Phoenix Foundation, an organization dedicated to helping trafficking victims rebuild their lives. She was a petite woman in her 40s with kind eyes and an immediately trustworthy demeanor that put Elena at ease. Sarah listened carefully as Elena told her story, occasionally asking gentle questions for clarification. She took notes on a legal pad but maintained eye contact throughout, making Elena feel heard rather than interrogated. When Elena finished speaking, Sarah set down her pen and leaned forward. "Elena, what happened to you was terrible, but I want you to know that you have more options than you might think. There's something called a T-visa, specifically designed for trafficking victims. It's a path to legal status and eventually permanent residency, but the process requires documentation and testimony." "Testimony?" Elena asked nervously. "You would need to cooperate with law enforcement to help prosecute the people who trafficked you. I know that's frightening, but you wouldn't be alone. We have advocates who work with victims throughout the entire process." Marcus watched Elena's face as she processed this information. He could see the fear warring with hope in her expression. After everything she had endured, the idea of voluntarily engaging with authorities felt almost impossible, but it was also her best chance at a genuine future. "What if they find me before I can testify? What if they hurt Marcus for helping me?" Elena asked. Sarah addressed both concerns seriously. "The Foundation works closely with local law enforcement to ensure victim safety. There are protective measures we can put in place. As for Marcus, helping a trafficking victim isn't illegal. He's done nothing wrong." The meeting lasted 3 hours, during which Sarah outlined a comprehensive plan for Elena's future. It would involve working with federal agents to identify and locate her traffickers, psychological counseling to help her process her trauma, English classes to improve her language skills, and eventually, job training to help her become self-sufficient. The foundation would provide legal representation throughout the process. Elena was overwhelmed by the complexity of it all, but also amazed that such resources existed. After living for months feeling completely powerless, the idea that there were people and systems designed specifically to help her felt almost too good to be true. "I need to think about this," Elena said finally. "Of course," Sarah replied. "Take all the time you need, but don't wait too long. The sooner we start the process, the stronger your case will be." Walking back to Marcus's apartment, Elena was quiet, lost in thought. The weight of the decision ahead of her felt enormous. Agreeing to testify would mean reliving her trauma in court, facing the possibility that her captors might never be caught, and accepting help from a system she had been taught to fear. But it would also mean the chance to build a real life, to become the teacher she had always dreamed of being. "What are you thinking?" Marcus asked as they climbed the stairs to his apartment. "I'm thinking that 6 months ago I was a completely different person. I had plans, dreams about the future, and everything changed. And I thought I would never be that person again. But now, maybe I can become someone even stronger." That evening, Elena made her decision. She would work with the Foundation and law enforcement, despite her fears. Marcus supported her choice completely, even though he knew it meant their comfortable, hidden life together would have to end. Elena would need to move to a safe house while her case was being prepared, and their contact would be limited for security reasons. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of activity. Elena met with federal agents who were building a case against the trafficking ring that had held her. She provided detailed descriptions of the house where she had been kept, the men who controlled the operation, and the other victims she had met. The agents were particularly interested in her information because she had escaped relatively recently and could provide current intelligence about the group's activities. Marcus attended many of these meetings as Elena's support system, watching with pride as she found her voice and strength. The scared, broken young woman he had found in the desert was becoming a confident advocate for herself and other victims. Her English improved rapidly with professional instruction, and her natural intelligence shone through as she learned to navigate complex legal and bureaucratic systems. The psychological counseling proved to be as important as the legal proceedings. Elena worked with a therapist who specialized in trauma recovery, slowly processing the horrible experiences she had endured while learning healthy coping mechanisms. The nightmares became less frequent and she began to sleep peacefully through the night. During this period, Marcus found himself falling deeper in love with Elena, but he was careful not to pressure her with his feelings. She was rebuilding her entire life and needed space to figure out who she wanted to become. He focused on being the friend and supporter she needed, even though it sometimes meant maintaining an emotional distance that felt unnatural. Elena, for her part, was acutely aware of Marcus's feelings and found herself returning them. But she also understood that she needed to become whole on her own before she could give herself fully to anyone else. The last thing she wanted was to build a relationship based on gratitude and dependency rather than genuine love and partnership. 6 months after that first meeting with Sarah Chen, Elena received news that the federal case against her traffickers was moving forward. Several arrests had been made, and other victims had come forward with similar stories. Elena's testimony would be crucial, but she was ready. She had practiced with prosecutors, worked through her fears in therapy, and built a support network that would sustain her through the trial. Marcus attended the first day of proceedings, sitting in the gallery where Elena could see him if she needed encouragement. As she took the witness stand, he marveled at her transformation. The woman testifying with quiet authority bore little resemblance to the broken person he had found in the desert. Elena had not just survived her ordeal, she had used it as a foundation for building something stronger. Elena's testimony was powerful and detailed, helping prosecutors paint a clear picture of the trafficking operation. She spoke not just about her own experience, but about the other victims she had known, giving voice to those who couldn't speak for themselves. When the defense attorney tried to intimidate her during cross-examination, Elena remained calm and composed, answering every question with dignity and truth. The trial lasted 3 weeks, ending with convictions for all the major figures in the trafficking ring. Elena's visa was approved, putting her on a path to permanent residency and eventually citizenship. She enrolled in a community college to begin working toward her teaching degree, something that had seemed impossible just a year earlier. Marcus was offered a promotion at his delivery company, recognizing his reliability and character. But more importantly, he had discovered a sense of purpose he had never known before. He began volunteering with the Phoenix Foundation, helping other trafficking victims navigate the early stages of recovery. His experience with Elena had taught him that sometimes the most important thing you can do is simply show up for another person. As Elena settled into her new life, she and Marcus began to explore their relationship beyond the crisis that had brought them together. They took things slowly, building a foundation based on mutual respect and shared values rather than dependency. Eleanor moved into her own apartment near the college, But they spent most evenings together cooking dinner and talking about their days. One evening, as they walked through downtown Tucson, Eleanor stopped suddenly and turned to Marcus. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if you hadn't found me that day?" Marcus considered the question seriously. "I think about it all the time, not just what would have happened to you, but what would have happened to me. I was just going through the motions of living before I met you. You saved my life too, in your own way." Elena smiled and took his hand. "When I was in the desert, dying of thirst, I prayed for a miracle. I never imagined the miracle would be so much bigger than just surviving." 2 years later, Elena graduated from community college with honors and was accepted into the state university's education program. Marcus was in the audience with Sarah Chen and other friends from the foundation as Elena walked across the stage to receive her diploma. The young woman who had once been voiceless was now preparing to spend her life helping children find their own voices through education. Marcus and Elena were married the following spring in a small ceremony attended by the community of friends they had built together. Sarah Chen officiated, and Elena wore a simple white dress that she had bought with money from her part-time job at a local elementary school. In her brief speech at the reception, Elena spoke about how love and compassion had the power to transform not just individuals, but entire communities. "Marcus found me dying in the desert," she said, looking at her new husband with eyes full of love and gratitude. "But what we found together was a way to live fully. Every day since then has been a gift we've given each other." 3 years later, Elena was teaching third grade at an elementary school in a low-income neighborhood, many of her students coming from immigrant families facing their own struggles. She had a special understanding of what it meant to feel powerless and afraid, and she used that experience to create a classroom environment where every child felt valued and safe. Marcus had started his own non-profit organization focused on supporting trafficking survivors in rural areas where resources were limited. He often thought about that June day when he had been just another delivery driver going through the motions of life. Finding Elena had not just saved her life, it had given both of them a purpose larger than themselves. On weekends, they would sometimes drive out into the desert together, visiting the spot where their paths had first crossed. It was marked now by a small wooden cross that Marcus had placed there, not as a religious symbol, but as a reminder of the moment when two lost people had found their way to each other, and in doing so, had found their way to a life worth living. Standing in that desert place, Elena would often reflect on the journey that had brought them there. The terrifying months of captivity, the desperate flight across the wasteland, the moment when she thought she would die alone and forgotten. And then Marcus appearing like an answer to prayer, offering not just water and shelter, but the possibility of becoming whole again. The desert that had once threatened to claim her life had become a sacred place, the beginning of a story about how compassion could transform everything it touched. Elena had learned to see beauty in the harsh landscape, recognizing it as the place where her real life had begun. Not the life that had been stolen from her, but the life she had chosen to build from the ashes of trauma and loss. Their story became part of the Foundation's outreach efforts, helping other survivors understand that recovery was not just possible, but could lead to lives richer and more meaningful than anything they had imagined before. Elena would speak to groups of newly rescued women, sharing her journey from the depths of despair to a life filled with purpose and love. "The desert taught me that sometimes you have to be broken completely before you can be rebuilt into something stronger," she would tell them. "And sometimes the person who finds you in your darkest moment becomes the person you build your brightest future with." Marcus would watch these presentations with quiet pride, knowing that his decision to stop for a stranger in the desert had led not just to Elena's salvation, but to their shared mission of healing a broken world, one person at a time. The compassion that had driven him to help a dying woman had grown into something larger than either of them could have imagined, touching countless lives and creating ripples of hope that extended far beyond the Arizona desert where their story began.